right, awesome. So, can you all see my screen? Awesome.
Yes.
So, great. So hello again from my screen. As you can see here, this is a compiler. Now, a compiler is basically a software that we use to actually execute our code. And there are hundreds of compilers online, and some people actually download compilers on their laptops as well. So if you do have experience in C++, or you do have experience in any other programming language, feel free to use any compilers you would like to use. However, for now, we are using the GDB compiler. I will be sending you a link to the GDB compiler via email. But I'm going to try my best to send it right now. If you girls would like to, you would like to test the code as we work together and as we discuss. So I just sent it on the chat. But you can feel free to keep up with the session, and you can feel free to do whatever you want. So as you can see here on the top of the screen, we have hash include IOStream and using namespace std. Now these, for now, we do not need to know why these are here. We might be discussing them later on in the course, but just for now, know that we need to have the hash include, which is actually a library, and we need using namespace std to execute our code. So starting with the simplest code, I think this is basically everyone's first project on C++ and everyone's first project like into programming. Like this is the first project everyone does, which is the Hello World project. Now, as you can see here, we have the int main, and this is actually a function. This is what we call a function in programming. And in the main function, everything we write inside the main function, everything we write inside these curly brackets will be executed whenever we run the code. So let's actually try to run the code over here. So if you can all see this black screen, this black screen is actually called the console, or it's like a window where whenever we run the code and whenever we execute the code, everything we actually write and all the statements we write would be shown here on this window, on this console. And as you can you see here, can you see cout? I've shaded it on the screen. This actually stands for console out. So we use the cout to actually print information into the console and print information to the user. So hello world is basically plain text, and plain text in programming is also called a string. So hello world here is a string, and strings are simply just plain text. They are a bunch of characters that make up a certain word, or they make up a certain phrase. And we will be actually talking about strings later on throughout the course. But for now, cout is basically console out. So when whatever we have in between quotations is called a string. And when we cout a string, we actually see it here on the console or on this window. And endl here stands for end line. And we can actually replace endl with \n. It would be easier, but some people prefer endl, some people prefer \n. It all goes down to the programmer. So this is basically an introduction to programming. This is the main function, and as we mentioned, the main function, everything inside the main function will be executed. So here, as you can see, cout, it prints out a string, which is basically plain text, and here we have hello world. We can actually print out absolutely anything. We can print out farah, we can print out your favorite color, you can print out absolutely anything. So moving on to multiple different, we can try to actually create our own project right now. So we're gonna actually try to print out a rectangle, a triangle. So to print out a triangle, we're gonna just try to improvise right now. You can actually, I basically copied and pasted the cout statements to create a nice little rectangle. So I'm just improvising and have some underscores and print. So we have 4 cout statements that would give us a rectangle. So we're just going to wait for the window. We're going to wait for the console. And there you have it. So you can absolutely print anything you need. You can print anything you would like to print using the cout, the cout function. So here's the thing about programming. Here's the thing about C++. The order of each and every instruction is very, very important. So if we try to mix up the order and if we try to actually put the last cout first, we're going to get a weird shape. And this is definitely not a triangle. So when it comes to C++, again, order is very, very, very important. And instructions will be executed according to the order. So you can think of it as if it's like a recipe. When it comes to recipes, or like when you're baking a cake or baking cupcakes, you don't just put flour and butter and then put flour and butter in the oven and then take it out and finish your recipe. That's just not how it works. You have to follow a specific order. And this is basically what programming is all about. It's about creating certain sequences and writing specific instructions for a certain purpose. And we can actually go on to a different, like this is a story that I already prepared. It's a very, very short story. And these are all facts, by the way. So Noor, for example, Noor is 19 years old. Noor loves lasagna. Her favorite color is yellow. So Noor is my friend. And I wrote a story about Noor in 3 lines. So as you can see, we have cout. Noor is 19 years old. This is a string, plain text. And we ended the line after each time. So for example, if I wanted to switch things up, I don't want Noor to be the main character in this story. I want Gina to be the main character. And Gina is not 19, she is 27, for example. So here I have to change the information in each and every line. So for example, Gina loves ice cream and Gina's favorite color is not yellow, it's blue. So here it's easy because we have 3 instructions only. But what if we have hundreds and thousands of instructions and lines of code? It's going to be so difficult to change this information. And this is where variables play a big role. So think of variables as basically as like containers that contain information. And variables ease the process for the programmer because the programmer can actually, let's say, track the changes that happen along the program. So variables, there are many types of variables. We will be discussing 5 at the moment, but there are many, many different types of variables. And these types are called data types in programming. Now, if I'm speaking too fast, or if you're finding it a little difficult to keep up, please let me know because I do tend to speak a little fast sometimes. So if you have any questions, please ask and feel free to ask any questions you might have. So moving on to variables and data types. Now, let's, for example, say I want a variable to contain a name. So as we discussed, this plain text, or like whatever we have into quotation marks, is known as a string. And strings are actually a data type. Strings are data types, meaning they store specific, they store names, they can store colors, they can store absolutely anything. They can store anything that consists of various different characters. So let's start with string name, and we're going to give name a value. We're going to give name value Heya, for example. I'm just giving random names. So we want to be able to track the changes in the program. So I don't want Gina to be constant. I don't want this name to be constant. I want to be able to change the name and change the variables along the course, or like along the program. So for example, we started with string name. And what else do we need? We can start with age. Now, age is a whole number. So when it comes to numbers, in C++, we have two types of numbers. We have whole numbers, which are integers, and we also have decimal numbers, which can be float and double. So integers stand for int, which are whole numbers. And by the way, two backslashes are basically comments. Now, comments are often used to just remind the programmer of where they stopped or remind the programmer of the instruction. They're not really executed whenever we run the code. So that's why I like to add comments just to emphasize a certain idea. So we have integers, which are whole numbers. And for integers, we write int. And we have float, decimals. And we also have a different type of decimal, which is known as double. And double actually holds a bigger number than floats. However, it doesn't really matter. We're not going to be writing big chunks of code. We're going to be sticking to very simple programs. So it's not going to really matter if we use float or double. So basically, for double, we use bigger decimals or like more decimal places, let's say. And we also talked about the string, all right, which is basically plain text. And the last but not least, the last data type we're going to be talking about is the CHAR, which stands for character. Now, characters, they are basically single characters. They can be alphabets, they can be absolutely anything. They can be $sign, it can be an at, it can be an asterisk, it can be absolutely anything, but it's just one character. So strings are made out of multiple characters, while the CHR data type consists of one single character. So let's start with changing up our story. We do not want Gina to be the constant. We want to be able to control and to keep track of the changes. So I want to remove Gina, and I want to use the variable name. So as we mentioned, variables are basically containers that help us track the changes along the program. So to use the variable name, we have to actually type out name, which is the variable name, and end with two less than signs. Now, the two less than signs are very important because whenever we use a cout, we have to use two less than signs. So this is how we use variables. We basically use variables to track changes. So we're going to be using name again in the second instruction. So we're going to be starting slow. So we had Gina before, but now we're going to have Haya. So let's try to run the program and see what the console shows the user. So here we have Haya is 27 years old. Haya loves ice cream and her favorite color is blue. So let's try to change Haya to Farah, for example. It's supposed to print Farah is 27 years old. Farah loves ice cream and her favorite color is blue. So this is basically how variables work. Let's start to manipulate more, let's start to use more variables for food, for example, and for color. So we have to declare the variable again, and blue and ice cream are basically strings. So we're gonna have to use string again, and we use string food. You always have to give clear and let's say suitable names to your variables, just so you avoid misunderstandings, because whenever you come back to your program, you want to understand your program and not feel lost whenever you review your program. So for food, we're going to be giving an initial name of, let's just stick with lasagna, for example, which is what I had for lunch today. And for color, we're going to also give it a different, let's stick with yellow, for example. So can anyone help me change food here? So instead of having it a constant, we want to remove that and we want to stick with the variables. And instead of having blue a constant, we want to be able to control the color and keep track of the color. So can anyone help me incorporate that in the code, just like we did with name?
Yeah, so I can help you if you want.
Yes.
By the way, my name is Marah. I think you can all see it.
Hello, Marah.
After the less than signs, just write food,
Okay.
And then end it with the two last sign. Exactly like
100%.
that.
Absolutely.
Same goes for color.
Same
Next
goes
to
for
the
color.
in the third line next to the color thing.
100%.
Yes.
So let's give it a shot. Let's run our code. Thank you, Marah. Okay, let's see. So there you have it. Farah is 27 years old. Farah loves lasagna and her favorite color is yellow. Absolutely. And we can change these values along the code. Now, here's a tricky one. So what if I want to add an integer value that refers to the age, and I want to give age a value of 19, for example, and I want to change it here. I don't want 27 to be the constant. So what do you think we should do? Because strings have to end in 2 quotation marks. Does anyone have any ideas?
Split one string into 2.
Absolutely. So splitting strings means that we have to end the first string with another quotation mark, have 2 less than signs, and then write age, since age is the variable that we want to print out, and then have 2 more less than signs and start the other string with a quotation mark. Because if we leave a quotation mark out, then we're going to have a syntax error. And a syntax error means the compiler tells you basically that you've written the code wrong, so you have to try again and check where exactly you did that mistake in your code. So let's try again. So we had 27 here. It's supposed to print 19 now. So let's run the code. Let's execute the code and see. There you have it. So Farah is 19 years old. Farah loves lasagna and her favorite color is yellow. And we can keep on editing these variables. And for example, like if midway through the code, midway through the program, you realize that Farah's favorite color is not yellow, it's something else. What's really cool about variables is that you can reassign them when you are writing your code. So before we actually print out this statement, before we see out this statement, we have to reassign the variable. So all we have to do is name the variable again and reassign it. So instead of yellow, we can go with red, for example, and we can execute again and see. So instead of her favorite color is yellow, it's going to print out her favorite color is red. So this is basically simple, like this is just a simple introduction to variables. So to solidify the information we just discussed, variables are containers that help us keep track of the changes throughout the program. Now, there are so many different variables. There are so many different data types. So we have integer, double, float, character, and string. And there's also another data type that we will be discussing later on, but we're going to vaguely discuss it right now, which is the bool data type. And bool actually stands for Boolean. And when it comes to bool data type, we can only assign the value a true or false value. So I'm just going to give an example right now. Is female, for example, and we have bool, which is Boolean. We can only assign true or false values for this variable. So is female, we can go with true, and bool is male equals false. This is just a very, very simple example. And you can also actually refer to true as 1 and refer to false as 0. So I'm going to comment these out. So instead of true, we can write 1. And instead of false, we can refer to it as 0. So these are data types that we will be actually discussing later on throughout the course. But for now, we just have to know that we have the string data type, which is basically a couple of characters right next to each other that form a specific phrase or name. We have integer, which is whole numbers. We have float, decimals, double, which is very similar to float. It just holds more decimal places. And character is simply just one single character. So does anyone have any questions so far? Are we good? Okay,
We're good.
awesome.
Thank you. Yeah.
Awesome. So we are going to be moving on to manipulating and working with numbers in C++. So we just discussed the data types, and I have a tricky question for you girls. I want to print out 3 cout statements. So the first one is going to be cout1, and the second one is going to be cout1 in using 1 quotation mark. And the last one is going to be cout1 using 2 quotation marks. So if we actually execute the code, it's going to give us, it's going to print out 1, 1, 1. So they're the same exact thing when you execute the code. But are they really the same exact thing? Are they? No, they're not. So can someone tell me why they're not the same thing?
Because of the quotation marks, like the double quotation marks makes it a string, but the no quotation marks makes it an integer. The one in the middle, I don't know. I don't know what it is.
You absolutely. So there's just one thing. Emily, would you like to? Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say that the one in the middle is a character.
Absolutely, yes. So the last one is a string, 100%, because as we mentioned, strings, in order for one to be a string, we need to use 2 quotation marks. And the second one is going to be a character. And the first one, what is the first one? Can someone tell me? It's a whole number. So what did we say about whole numbers?
An integer.
Absolutely. So when we actually cout, like when we actually print out these instructions and execute these instructions, they end up looking the same exact way, like they're literally the same exact thing on the console, on the window. But in the code, when you reread the code, you do realize that they are different. One here is an integer, and one here, because of the single quotation marks, is a character, and the 2 quotation marks makes the one a string. So this is just an extra example to solidify what we just learned about data types. So let's actually get to working with numbers. So what's really cool about C++ is that you can work with numbers however you would like to work with them. So there are specific arithmetic operations that we use. And these are arithmetic operations I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with, which are like addition, subtraction, multiplication. We use an asterisk for that, and we use for division, we use a slash. And then there's just one more operation that some of you might be familiar with and others might not be very familiar with, which is the modulus. Now the modulus, we refer to the modulus as a percent sign. And we all know that addition basically adds 2 numbers, subtraction subtracts 2 numbers, multiplication, which is the asterisk, multiplies, division. And the modulus actually finds the it actually finds the remainder of the division. So for example, let's try to execute a line of code. So we're going to try to print out the division of n divided by 3. So what do you think the console is going to give us? Let's see. 10 divided by 3 is 3, but the remainder is 1. So technically 3 is not an accurate answer. But when we cout 10 remainder, or like 10 modulus 3, we actually get the remainder of the division, which is going to be 1. So we're going to get 3 and 1. So this is new. Modulus is new, and we're going to be using it later on when we discover more and more functions. But other than that, all you have to know for now is that we have five arithmetic operations that we will be following, which are addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and modulus. So does anyone have any questions? Are we all good? Awesome. So I want us to review something real fast. So When it comes to C++, we follow the order of, or like the basic math order operation rules, which are BIDMAS, if you are familiar with them. So the priority goes to the brackets, then indices, then division, multiplication, addition, and subtraction. So what's really cool about C++ is that we follow BIDMAS. So if we want to see out 5 plus 4 multiplied by 10, it's gonna give us what do you think? It's gonna have to give us 45. Yep, there we go. So it's going to give us 45 because, as I mentioned, in C++, the priority goes according to the basics math order operation rules. However, if we actually include 2 brackets here, it's going to have to give us a different number since we set the priorities differently. It's going to give us 90. So in C++, we do follow BIDMAS. But what's actually slightly, so it's something that we need to be aware of when it comes to C++, which is the fact that if we see out, for example, 5 divided by 2, just like we did in a bit, we divided 10 by 3, it's not going to really give us an accurate answer. It's going to give us 2. And 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. Does anyone have any idea why we get 2 and not 2.5?
Because this is an integer, not a float. A float is a decimal, but an integer is a full number.
Absolutely, 100%. So in order for us to fix this, we could just easily make one of the numbers a floating number, or we can actually make both numbers floating numbers. So we're going to test both of them. So when we make one single number a floating number, it's going to give us the correct answer. However, sometimes we do, later on, we will be solving various different problems and various different computational problems where we will need the division to give us an integer value, even though the division is not really an integer. So here, let's try it again. We have 2 floating numbers. It's supposed to give us 2.5 again. So this is for division. And when we try, for example, multiplication, let's see what the console gives us. It's going to give us 10. So it doesn't really matter when it comes to a multiplication, but when it comes to division, for example, and we do have remainders, we cannot just simply keep them as integers, or else we would get a wrong answer. However, when it comes to a multiplication or any other operation that will not include any remainders, it will give us a whole number. So I want us to try to create our own calculator, but I want us to try to do it together. So I want you girls to help me create our own calculator, and I want us to declare 2 variables. So who can help me create our calculator right now using C++? Are there any volunteers? New names?
What do you mean by a calculator?
So by a calculator, I mean we want to declare 2 different variables. So num1, for example, I'm just going to start with the first step. And we're going to start with integers, and num2, and we're going to give it 6. So a calculator will give us the addition of these 2 numbers, subtraction, multiplication, division, and modulus. And all we have to do is just print them out on the console. So who can help me with that? We're going to start with cout. Okay. And I want to add number 1 to number 2.
So
What
5
do you
plus
plus
6.
5 plus 6. But what if I wanted to change the numbers? I wanted to go with 7 and 6, for example, or 7 and 8.
So
So you can just write num1 plus num2.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Num1 plus num2. And we're going to end the line. So what about subtraction?
Cone.
The same.
Maybe
just-
the same. Same, but the
The same.
We should just
Yeah.
like change the plus.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. And for multiplication, we do the same exact thing, but we include we include the asterisk. And for division, it's also the same exact thing. And for modulus, it's also the same exact thing, but we use the percent sign. So should we execute the code? Should we see what the code gives us? Let's go ahead and see. So there you have it. It gives us 15, which is the addition of these two numbers, and -1. Also, I forgot to mention that integers and floating numbers and doubles can work for positive and negative numbers. So that's why we have -1 here on the console, because it works, because 7 minus 8 is obviously -1. So negative numbers are allowed in C++ as well. So this is our first official project. We just created a calculator on C++. So I want us to move ahead and go with something a little harder. So if we want to, for example, get the input from the user. So we discussed cout, which is console out, and it prints out the information. But what if we want to receive the information from the user? So in order for us to receive information, we always have to store the information we are getting in a variable. So let's just stick with integer num1 and num2. Also, this is also allowed in C++. People find, programmers even find it a little more convenient. This is exactly the same thing as integer num1 and integer num2. But because it's the same data type, we can actually include them in the same line and just simply have a comma between the lines. But it's the same exact thing. So in C++, in order for us to receive information, it's basically the opposite of printing out the information. So we're going to be using cin. And the arrows need to be greater than num1, and then cin arrows greater than num2. And that's how we receive information. And also, even more, like even the advanced programmers sometimes mess up when it comes to the arrows, but it's very important to get these arrows right, because cin, the arrows are different. The arrows are greater than, and cout, they are less than. It will, the compiler will give you an error if you mistake the arrows. But it's also always clearer and more understandable to prompt the user to enter a number. So you can't just say cin num1 and cin num2 and have the user just wait for something to happen. So it's always easier and it's always better to prompt the user to enter specific numbers. So for example, we're just gonna enter a quick string. We're gonna ask the user to enter number 1, or we're gonna enter the first number, for example. And then we're gonna have cin n1. And then we're gonna simply copy paste this cout statement and ask for the second number, and then have all these instructions executed by the program. So are you ready to execute the program? Let's run and see what the program gives us. So here it's asking us for the first prompt. It's asking us to enter the first number. So I'm going to enter 10, for example. And then it's going to ask us to enter the second number, which is 3. And it's going to give us all the information. So what we learned so far, we learned about variables. We learned about data types. We learned how to make our own calculator. And we also learned how to receive information from the user. So let's try with different data types. Let's try with float, for example. It's going to be the same exact thing. It's just going to ask us for what? Oh, that's a very, very good point. So here's the thing. With floating numbers, we cannot use the mod operation, because usually modulus is used for integers. So when we have a floating number, or when these two numbers that the user will be in, that we will be asking the user to input are floating numbers or doubles, we cannot use the modulus. We cannot use the we cannot find the remainder of the division. So we have to comment this out. And we are just going to stick with these four statements. And we're going to see whether the program will execute them or not. So let's try 5 and 4, for example. And there you have it. And can you see the division over here? So because they're floating numbers, we have decimal points, right? But when we had the integer, when the data type was integer num1 and integer num2, even if the division gave us, even if there was a remainder, it would not show, because as we discussed, integers give us integer values and give us integer results. So, does anyone, so far, is everything clear? Are there any questions that you might have regarding C++, regarding the calculator, regarding data types? So we can move on to a different topic. So are we all good? Awesome.
Yes, thank you.
Awesome.
Oh,
So now
thanks.
we're gonna discuss a completely new topic. So I'm gonna keep it short and sweet today because I've been talking all this time, and this is just an introduction. This is just an introduction to the syntax, introduction to the data types, and the operations and the arithmetic operations and all of that. But we will be introducing something right now. We're going to be discussing it real quick, just so we can build on it later on. So now we are going to be discussing the if statements. Now, if statements are very, very important because they allow you to set a specific condition. They allow you to follow an instruction according to a condition. So let's just give an example. For example, we have integer number 1, all right? And we're going to ask the user to input number 1. So we want to figure out whether num1 is a positive or negative. All right? So this is where we get introduced to something new. Now, a positive integer is a positive integer and a negative integer is a negative integer. So in programming, we use specific operations to indicate or to actually compare a number, or like to compare a number to a digit, or compare a number to or compare a name, or compare a character to another character. But what distinguishes a positive number when compared to a negative number? Like, what's the difference between positive and negative?
Well,
A positive number.
the
A
negative
positive,
number is less than 0.
absolutely. So negative is less than 0 and positive is greater than 0. So this is what we're going to be using right now in this if statement. So if statements allow us to compare, or allow us to have a condition, and according to the condition, we get the chance to execute specific instructions. So we want our program to print out num1 is a negative number if it was less than 0. And we wanted to print out number 1 is a positive number if it was greater than 0. So every if statement has brackets, and in these brackets we include the condition. But before the if statement, I think there's something missing, since we want to ask the user for the number. What should I include here before the if statement? How do I receive the number from the user?
Cn.
Cn, absolutely. And how are the arrows?
Bigger than.
Greater than, absolutely. They're facing inwards. So num1, and here we received the number from the user, but we always want to make it easier to the user and set a specific prompt. So we can ask, please enter an integer number or integer value. And we wait for the user to enter. So in the if statement, in the brackets, we include the condition. So as we mentioned, if num1 is less than 0, what would the number be? It's going to be negative, right? Yeah,
Number.
absolutely. So in if statements, we have to include curly brackets. Now, when it comes to compiler, whenever you just print out one curly bracket and click enter, it gives you another curly bracket. So this over here is the block of code. And if the if statement here was true, it would enter the if statement and execute what's inside the if statement. So here in our program, in our mini project, we want to print out we want to print out that the number is negative if it's negative, and if it's positive, we want to print out that it's positive. So all we have to do is see out a string. So we're going to see out. Can someone help me with that? Can someone finish the line?
We open
The
quotation.
number is positive, negative. I'm sorry.
So it's negative, yes. But what do we have to include before saying that the number is negative?
The quotation marks.
There's something before the quotation marks. We want to say, for example, if it was -5, we want to say -5 is a negative number.
If
So basically, print num1 is.
Num1, yeah, absolutely. So we have to include the name of the variable. And now we include our quotation marks. So since if num1 is less than 0, the program should print num1 is a negative number. All right? So here's the thing. If num1 was actually greater than 0, the program should print positive, right? So here is where else, if, or else, it doesn't matter. We can use else if or else, but usually else if is preferred. Else if num1 is greater than 0, all we have to do is copy paste the cout statement and only like alter negative into positive. So all we did here is include two if statements. If num1, we ask the user to input a number, and if num1 is less than 0, the program will print out num1 is a negative number, and else if number 1 is greater than 0, meaning it's a positive number, the program will print out num1 is a positive number. So let's try and execute our code and see what happens. So we're going to try to enter -10, for example. -10 is a negative number. So awesome, our code is working. Let's try a positive number and see if our code is working. Let's try 6, for example. 6 is a positive number. Awesome. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention one small thing. So in C++, and this is actually different from one programming language to the other. In C++, we have to end our statements or our sentences with a semicolon. This is how the compiler knows that the programmer has just ended the sentence and will be going on and will be moving on to a different instruction. So semicolons are very important. So for example, if I forgot one semicolon, the compiler will give me an error message and tell me that I forgot a semicolon. So we have to always include our semicolons. Sometimes I even forget my semicolons. So, but the good thing is the compiler always tells you where the error is. So are you ready to move on to a problem that's a little more difficult? I'm gonna ask you girls a question. So I want us to write a program that receives a number from the user. So I'm just going to keep this chunk. I'm just going to keep this block of code. I want the program to figure out whether this number is even or odd. Even or odd. So again, what distinguishes an even number from an odd number?
If we divide the number by 2 and we get a remainder of 0, then it's even. And if we divide the number by 2 and we get a remainder different than 0, then it's odd.
Absolutely, 100%. So how do you think we can do this? I want you girls to help me do this from scratch. So we ask the user to enter, and now we want to write our if statements.
We say that if num1 modulo 2
Absolutely.
is equal to 0.
So we're going to talk about that right now. I'm just going to go with equals 0.
I
What do
think-
we
Can I
say?
interrupt?
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to put equal 0.
100%. So we're gonna get back to that in a minute. But what's the statement inside the if statement here? What should we print out?
See out less than num1 less
Yeah.
than, we open quotation marks, is an even number.
Is an even number. Absolutely. So someone actually mentioned something about the equal sign here. And this is a very, very, very important comment, because when we say num1 modulus 2 equals 0, here we are assigning the value of num1 modulus 2. But in if statements, we do not want to assign a value. We want to compare a value. So in C++ or in any other programming language, we have to use let equal equal. So equal actually gets the compiler to understand, or like it makes the compiler understand that here we are currently comparing, we are not assigning. But for example, difference between assigning and comparing, just like we did in a bit, like integer number, int num2, for example, equals 9. This is how we assign. We only use one equal sign. We can't use two equal signs. But since we are working with if statements, we have to use two equal signs. All right? So moving on to the second statement. Can someone help me with that?
Else if num1 modulo 2 exclamation mark equal 0, I think.
So yeah, you do have some background in programming.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, exclamation marks equal
0.
We're gonna be talking about that in a bit. What should the program tell the user?
That it's an odd number. So see out.
Absolutely. So here's the thing. When it comes to C++ again, the exclamation mark is basically not. All right? So here we are telling the user, if num1 modulus 2 is 0, equals 0, then print out that it's an even number. However, if num1 modulus 2 does not equal 0, it should be an odd number. So exclamation mark is not. I'm going to actually comment these out. So for example, equal, we're just going to say is, and does not equal is not. All right. And there are also different operations that we can use. For example, we can say greater than or equal. That's greater than or equal. Because sometimes in mathematics, we actually have like a small little line under the arrow over here. But here in programming, we say less than or equal. And then it's the opposite for greater than. It's the opposite for less than or equal. And then we have just less than, and then we have less than and a greater than and less than. So these are operations that we actually use. But this is perfect. Honestly, you guys are absolutely amazing. So how about we try and run our code? Okay, so let's enter 31, for example. 31 is an odd number. And let's try an even number this time. Let's try 22, for example. We're going to execute again. Oops, I entered 2 twice. It's fine. It took the first two that I entered. And 222 is, in fact, an even number. Awesome. So our program actually works, which is amazing. Now, I actually wanted to keep this session short and sweet. I wanted us to discuss the basic operations. I wanted us to discuss the syntax, C in, C out, and I also wanted us to cover a little bit of the if statements. But I do not want to. I don't want to introduce a completely different topic right now. But I do want us to be ready next time, and I'm going to be sending you an email today, including different exercises that you can actually practice, so you can be ready for the next session. So I think we're going to stop here today, just so it's just a basic introduction to the operations, basic introduction to the input and output, and starting with if statements. So if you have any other questions, can you send? Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to be sending you, I'm going to be sending this page, and I'm going to be sending the other pages. I'm going to be including some notes as well, just to revise. But the recording will also be available to everyone. I think some people actually answered a little late, so they missed out on this piece of information, but the recordings will be available. We might actually have a private YouTube channel that I will be giving you access to, so you can access the recordings and access the sessions whenever you want. So again, I'm going to be sending you some exercises today, and I would love to hear from you girls. I would love to see some solutions, and that's it. So please get ready for next time. Revise all the information we discussed today, and if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask.
I'm sorry, can I ask? So in the else if, can we just write like count number is an odd number and I without number model 2, not 0?
So are you talking about line 17?
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you mean, the condition, or do you mean the actual else if?
Condition.
Okay. So you want the condition to be, I didn't quite get that. So what do you want to do with the condition?
So it's like, can we just write else if without condition? Because we have like two choice, even and odd. If it's not even, it's definitely will be odd.
Absolutely. So here's the thing, I wanted to discuss that next time as well, but
okay,
we can actually mention it right now. No, it's totally fine. That's a great observation. We can mention it right now. So basically, if no one understood the question, or if no one heard the question, it's, so we have two conditions here. It's either the number is even or it's odd. There are no other exceptions. So it's either even or odd. So instead of else if num1 modulus 2 does not equal 0, we can just simply remove this statement and just say else, you know? But else if is usually preferred, but it's totally fine. You can just say else because there are no other exceptions. So it's going to be the same exact thing. So let's try it again. For example, enter a number. We're going to go with 45. It's going to give us that 45 is an odd number. So thank you for your question. That's actually a really good observation. We can totally remove if else if, sorry, and just replace it with else. Yes. So are there any other questions?
Yes, I just have one question. So in our code, we declared num1 as an integer. Let's say the user wrote a decimal number. Will the code give us error?
That's a very good question. So do you want to try it out? Let's give it a shot.
Yeah.
I want to show you. I want to show you how how it executes. So we assigned this as an integer, but we want to enter 56.9 for it. Oh, 65.9, for example. It's just going to take the integer part. Okay, so it's not going to consider 0.9. It's not going to even round. So it's just going to take 65. However, although since we mentioned before, we cannot use modulus on floating numbers, it is going to give us an error if we declare num1 as a float or a double. But when it comes to that, like if you enter a 65.8 or if you enter 78.9, it's just going to take the integer part only. It's going to disregard what's on the right and what's next to the decimal point, since it's assigned as an integer. That's also a very, very good question. So thank you for that. Okay, so I'm not gonna introduce anything new right now. It's been a short session, but next time we're gonna have a bunch of questions that we're gonna solve together. So if you could revise the data types and revise these operations, that would be great. And I am gonna be sending you some questions that you can revise as well. So thank you so much for today, girls. You're absolutely amazing. And I'll see you next Wednesday, hopefully. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me or WhatsApp me.
Yes,
Thank you so
thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Anytime.
Bye.
يعطيك العافية.
Allah يعافيك. Thank you.
See you next week.
See you. Take care. Have a
Bye.
great day. Bye-bye.